Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. Federal employees are heading back to work today after President Trump signed legislation to end the longest government shutdown last night. How lawmakers are reacting to the bill's passage. Trump's top economic advisor said the shutdown cost about 60,000 jobs and accumulated up to 1.5% of GDP. What he says about October's jobs report. Congress moves to release Jeffrey Epstein records, forcing a House vote that could reveal new details about the convicted sex offenders network. The judge heard arguments today in the criminal cases against New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey over whether the Justice Department's prosecutor was illegally appointed.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Today is Thursday, November 13th. I'm Stephanie Cox. Former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James are asking a South Carolina judge to disqualify the interim U.S. attorney who brought the criminal cases against them. They claimed that recently appointed government attorney Lindsay Halligan was never eligible to take on the prosecutor role, and say Halligan was appointed after a previous U.S. attorney in the district had used up the temporary 120-day period allowed. And they say Attorney General Pam Bondi does not have the authority to select back-to-back appointments. And their argument goes on to say, therefore, the indictments against them could be dismissed. The Justice Department argues that even if Halligan is improperly serving in the role, the indictments should not be thrown out because they don't hinge on her holding the office. If the presiding judge decides to disqualify Halligan, the indictments against James and Comey could become moot. We'll be keeping you updated there. After a record 43 days, the nation's longest government shutdown is now over. President Trump signed a funding bill late last night, ending over a month of furloughs and delays across the country. Here are the details.
President Trump signed a stopgap bill around 10:25 p.m. last night, officially reopening the federal government and restoring pay for hundreds of thousands of federal employees.
Today we're sending a clear message that we will never give in to extortion, because that's what it was. In just a moment, I'll sign a bill exactly like we asked Democrats to send us all along, many days ago.
The motion is adopted.
The House cleared the measure 222 to 209, with 6 Democrats joining Republicans to end the standoff. The fight that triggered the shutdown centered on the expiring Affordable Care Act tax credits. Democrats wanted an immediate extension. Republicans said the issue should be debated later. But the stopgap bill cleared the Senate earlier this week without an extension. Going into the House vote, some Democrats criticized the bill.
I think it is a raw deal for the American people.
After the vote, Speaker Mike Johnson gave credit to the GOP for not wavering.
We feel very relieved tonight. The Democrat shutdown is finally over, thanks to House and Senate Republicans who stood together to get the job done.
Congressman Don Davis, a Democrat who broke ranks to back the funding bill, defended his vote last night, but said the fight would continue.
People are hurting out there. I mean, they're getting hit with costs. Their parents trying to raise kids. Farmers been hit. I mean, this is not over by any means.
President Trump also used the moment to renew his call to end the Senate filibuster, saying the rule enables partisan gridlock.
I hope we can all agree that the government should never be shut down again, end the filibuster, terminate the filibuster. It'll never happen again.
The bill ensures funding for major departments and food assistance programs through next fall, but only extends funding for the rest of the federal government till the end of January. The same healthcare fight could spark another shutdown when that temporary runs out. After the House vote yesterday, Speaker Johnson declined to commit on a vote to extend Affordable Care Act subsidies.
Federal workers are heading back to the office now that the longest government shutdown in U.S. history is over. Federal employees could be seen returning to work in Washington this morning. In a memo last night, the White House's Office of Management and Budget instructed federal employees who had been furloughed to report to work today. The order came shortly after President Trump signed the shutdown bill. About 670,000 federal workers had been furloughed.
I very much look forward to going back to work as soon as possible. The business has been cash flow positive, but I really, more importantly, I just really wanted to mention the outpouring of community support. I feel like the community here really has my back. I love seeing the people each day, and I'm looking forward to seeing my colleagues as well as soon as the shutdown ends.
During an interview with CNN this morning, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said most people will receive their SNAP benefits by this weekend. And from healthcare to travel and customer service, here's a look at how reopening the government could affect you.
The reopening of the government is having real-world impacts on Americans today. More services are becoming available again with the return of furloughed federal employees. They're set to get back pay, and some experts predict an economic rebound.
Even though it gets made up in the measured GDP data, the real human impact is never fully recovered.
For people on Obamacare, the reopening could mean their health insurance costs will more than double. Democrats vow to keep fighting.
Either Republicans finally decide to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits this year, or the American people will throw Republicans out of their jobs next year.
The House Speaker says he wants program reforms first.
Am I going to guarantee a vote on ACA unreformed COVID-era subsidies that is just a boondoggle to insurance companies and robs the taxpayer? We got a lot of work to do on that.
It's unclear when flight schedules will return to normal, but SNAP benefits should be available again soon.
Food should not be up for a bargain. Everyone should have the right to eat.
For many programs, the bill provides funding through January.
And with the government shutdown now over, officials and travelers are hoping the nation's airports and flight schedules will soon return to normal. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the latest from the aviation industry.
Transport Secretary Sean Duffy announced yesterday that flight reductions will remain frozen at 6%, a move meant to stabilize operations while the FAA works to restore normal service. The pause halts a planned increase to 8% and then 10% cuts as the agency reviews staffing and system performance. In a statement, Secretary Duffy said, President Trump's message has been heard loud and clear. Controllers will be made whole quickly. Duffy says controllers will receive 70% of their back pay within 48 hours of the shutdown ending. Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian says that he hopes airline travel will be back close to normal by tomorrow, speaking on Bloomberg.
Once people start getting paid, and I know Secretary Duffy is committed to getting those paychecks out right away. So over the next couple of days, I think you'll see things starting to turn to normal.
United CEO Scott Kirby discussed how long it will take their operations to resume back to full capacity, speaking on the Katie Miller podcast.
We'll be able to ramp up as quickly as the FAA. FAA is going to be the constraint. And by the way, I think the FAA deserves an A+. They've done a great job in a really uncertain, they don't know how many people are going to show up to work. They want to keep the system safe. I was 100% supportive of what they did.
Southwest Airlines echoed that view, telling employees yesterday it's optimistic the FAA will soon allow U.S. carriers to resume full schedules. During the 43-day shutdown, air traffic controllers worked without pay, and staffing shortages mounted at facilities nationwide, causing widespread flight disruptions. Since October 1st, tens of thousands of flights have been delayed or canceled, affecting more than 1.2 million passengers last weekend alone. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thank you, Daniel, for that report. And travelers at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airports spoke on the ending of the government shutdown. Take a listen.
I'm really happy about that for the people that are traveling for the holidays, At least that takes it off their plate worrying about getting there or getting home, hopefully.
I think people are willing to put up with a little inconvenience, but we don't want to jeopardize the lives of people. And I think the nation was starting to be worried about that. We can't, when you have less staff or less pilots or less air traffic controllers, there's a chance for something to happen. So knock on wood, I'm glad that hasn't happened, and hopefully things can resume.
The Smithsonian says several museums will reopen tomorrow. These include the Museum of American History and the Air and Space Museum. Other museums and the National Zoo will reopen gradually, with all expected to be open by Monday. And a top economic advisor for President Trump is weighing in on both the government shutdown and Trump's mention of $2,000 paychecks for $2,000 checks for Americans. Here's Kevin Hassett.
Our Council of Economic Advisors said that it cost about $15 billion a week, and it accumulates to maybe 1.5% of GDP when you account for multiplier effects. And their current estimate is that 60,000 Americans, not government workers, have lost their jobs because of the reduced economic output. But if you look at how much tariff revenue has been coming in, then there would actually be enough room to cover those checks and not go into the rest of the budget. So yeah, there would be enough money to pay for the $2,000 checks.
Hassett said the October jobs report will be released without unemployment data. It's getting a late release due to the shutdown, and Hassett says the full data will never be known. As for the economic health of the nation, Hassett said President Trump's policies have stopped runaway inflation and created income growth. He says there's further to go to make up for the remaining $2,000 deficit in purchasing power for the average American worker. And a major move in Congress could force the release of government records tied to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. A discharge petition in the House has reached the 218 signatures needed to compel a vote on the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Arizona Democrat Adelita Grijalva became the final signature yesterday, joining all Democrats and 4 Republicans, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace. The bill calls for the Justice Department to release unclassified records involving Epstein, his convicted associate Ghislaine Maxwell, and others linked to his crimes. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he plans to bring the bill to a vote next week. The White House yesterday accused House Democrats of selectively leaking emails related to Epstein that referenced President Trump and of failing to provide full context to create a fake narrative to smear the president.
These emails prove absolutely nothing other than the fact that President Trump did nothing wrong. And what President Trump has always said is that he was from Palm Beach, and so was Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a member at Mar-a-Lago until President Trump kicked him out because Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile and he was a creep.
The United States government is open for business. What does that mean for you and for the country? Joining us for Insight now is Professor of Political Science at Tarleton University, Dr. Bo Kabbalah. Good to have you with us today, Dr. Bo.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Now, first, your reaction to the end of the shutdown.
Yeah, spectacular news. And this was the longest shutdown on record. So I think everybody was getting nervous. I have to be in Boston this coming week. So thank goodness. I wasn't sure if we could go past 35 days, which was the previous longest shutdown. But good to see stability start to be restored and all kinds of political questions and implications going forward, certainly.
That's it. What's the biggest thing that you're wondering about from a political standpoint?
I think we have the sort of received wisdom confirmed, people who say open the government or else. That just never works. It didn't work for Republicans in the 1990s against Bill Clinton or for the GOP against President Obama. Politically now, I think the question is, where does the Democratic Party go? In many ways, you could say this has been a victory for moderates in the Democratic Party. So 8 senators joined a majority of the Senate to allow for reopening in New Jersey and Virginia. There's the case that could be made that Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger, moderate Democrats won, and the base is very unhappy with Chuck Schumer. So there's a war going on within the Democratic Party, and I just think politically, we'll see where this goes. The Democratic Party is struggling to find its identity, and that's the struggle that we'll see play out.
And how do you see this potential win for moderates in the Democratic Party weighing against the recent win of Mamdani to the role of mayor in New York City? And he's notably much further left of moderate.
Absolutely. He's openly a Democratic socialist. It looks like the mayor of Seattle will now be a Democratic socialist. So undoubtedly, there's a big part of the Democratic Party that can make the case they didn't get anything out of this reopening. I mean, in my opinion, that's not the case, but there's a logic there. So we're going to have a vote on restoring Affordable Care Act subsidies, but the reopening itself does not commit to an extension of this aspect of the Affordable Care Act. And so I think the Democratic Socialists can point to Mamdani, can say, this strategy politically did not work. So I think both sides will be energized as the Democratic Party fights it out for its future here.
And just to that point of there being a vote, and it's not likely that Democrats will get their way in that vote. So do you anticipate another shutdown coming early next year?
I'm not entirely sure that there won't be an outcome to the subsidy vote that isn't agreeable to Democrats. I think on the Republican side, senators like Josh Hawley have really warned, and that many Americans in rural areas, they're not just Democrats, it's Republicans and Democrats, have come to depend on the price support, the support that over these many years the subsidies have provided. So I'm not 100% sure whether it's an extension of the subsidies, whether President Trump is getting together with Senator Fetterman to see about a different kind of creative solution. I think warning voices on the Republican side are sounding the alarm. The subsidies cannot just be allowed to expire. There needs to be something that's done to address this healthcare, really situation that's imminent.
And there were a number of other issues, although that one got the biggest airtime in the Democrats' sticking points to let the government reopen. What do you see happening to those other key areas, such as funding agencies and also, letting employees go within the government, those issues?
Absolutely. Well, there's a commitment in the legislation now to provide back pay for furloughed workers. Of course, we saw in Virginia the fact that civil servants, government employees were not receiving paychecks, likely played a big role in that governor's race. So it's interesting. I mean, the legislation, it's a combination of 2 appropriations bills. We should have 12 appropriations bills to actually fund our government. That's the right way to do it. But we're combining 2 out of 12 here with a continuing resolution, as it's known, that keeps the government funded through the end of the year. So in my opinion, we'll see, plane flights resume. We won't see mass chaos at airports, although we were starting to get into it. In my opinion, the bigger question is, should we do something about our budget process going forward? Yeah. The current budget process set up in the 1970s, so we can afford this kind of thing every few years.
I mean, the system is set up to presumably allow this kind of thing to happen, and it has happened so many times in U.S. history, though this being the longest one does make you kind of stop and think, is this system working as it was designed to? Is this the best way that it could work? And if not, what do you think could be a possible solution going forward?
Sure. Well, and the system that's put in place in the late 1970s, and it's so Byzantine, but you've got the Congressional Budget Office, which provides the House and the Senate with numbers. You've got the Office of Management and Budget that is supposed to be providing the executive branch with numbers. At some point, asking about, streamlining, I think would be well worth looking at. At some point, do we want to consolidate a little bit so that it's not 12 appropriations bills that are needed, but maybe 2 or 3? There's different creative solutions that people could consider. But in my opinion, yes, this is an option. But yes, something needs to be done, because this is really not good for anybody to have the shutdowns and the disruption and the dislocation, which was about to get much more severe in this case. So at least we avoided that.
Certainly. Now the government's back open. All eyes are on the road ahead, but there's going to be plenty of looking in the rearview mirror and looking within at many levels of government and within politics. Thank you so much for your insights today, Dr. Bo Kalbala. Good to speak with you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
Homeland Security and the state of Florida announced a major enforcement surge across the Sunshine State. In total, authorities arrested more than 230 criminal illegal immigrants, including 150 sexual predators. Governor Ron DeSantis commented today.
Some of these guys had committed offenses against children, sexual predators. These were people that under the Biden administration, they were allowed to just roam with no threat of serious deportation. The times have changed. We have tremendous momentum in the state of Florida because of our leadership on being the #1 state to support the Trump administration's policies to take illegal aliens who are in our country, remove them, and send them back to their home country.
The effort was called Operation Criminal Return, also nicknamed Operation Dirtbag. The operation was conducted between state and local law enforcement authorities. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says she calls this Operation Dirtbag because these individuals were not just sex offenders, they targeted children. Some of the charges include sexual assault, battery, and attempted homicide. Next, the U.S. Treasury Department has issued sanctions imposed on restrictions on Mexican cartel-linked establishments. It's meant to keep drug cartel money from being laundered in U.S. banks. The U.S. Treasury's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence traveled to Mexico in September. As a result, major actions were announced today. They're meant to cut off cartel money from flowing through U.S. financial institutions. Mexico and the U.S. are working together to target the Hassett organized crime group. It has criminal connections with the Sinaloa cartel. A group of businesses related to the group are facing sanctions. The businesses are mostly in Mexico, with some in Canada and one in Poland. The sanctions bar anyone from conducting transactions in the U.S. involving any of the crime group's assets or interests. Foreign financial institutions that knowingly deal with the crime group will face sanction penalties in the U.S. And more than 1,000 Starbucks workers are on strike today, timing their walkout with the company's busiest Red Cup day. The union-led strike affects about 65 stores in 45 cities, including New York, Seattle, and Dallas. Organizers say they're protesting stalled contract talks and demanding higher pay, better hours, and improved staffing. They also accuse Starbucks of retaliating against pro-union employees. The company says the vast majority of its 10,000 U.S. stores remain open and insists it offers an industry-leading pay and benefits package averaging $30 an hour. The company's benefits include up to 18 weeks of paid family leave and 100% tuition coverage for a 4-year college degree. The union says the strike is open-ended and could expand if no deal is reached, while the company maintains it's ready to return to the bargaining table. Hundreds of residents were evacuated and dozens hospitalized after a tanker truck leaked ammonia gas in Weatherford, Oklahoma, late last night. Officials say the leak came from a truck parked outside a hotel, spewing a toxic cloud of ammonia that left many struggling to breathe. At least 36 people were taken to hospitals, with 11 transferred for further treatment. Around 600 residents spent the night in emergency shelters, while nursing homes were evacuated and schools shut down. Authorities also urged businesses in the area to remain closed and advised others to shelter in place. Hazmat crews and the Oklahoma National Guard responded to the scene. Officials say the leak has stopped, but calm winds are slowing efforts to clear the gas. Weatherford sits about 70 miles west of Oklahoma City. And a large payout in a Chicago federal court. A jury has awarded more than $28 million to the relatives of a United Nations environmental specialist. The expert died in a 2019 crash of a Boeing 737 jet in Ethiopia. The verdict was the first civil trial stemming from the 2019 disaster that killed all 157 people on board. Sheikha Garg's family will receive nearly $36 million due to 26% interest added to the verdict amount. The lawsuit alleged that the 737 MAX was defective and Boeing failed to warn passengers and the public about its dangers. The Ethiopian crash happened 5 months after Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea in Indonesia. And iPhone users now have a new way to present identification at U.S. airports. Digital ID and Apple Wallet is now being tested at TSA checkpoints at more than 250 airports in the U.S. Apple says you create the ID using your valid U.S. passport. It works even if you do not have a real ID-compliant driver's license or state ID. The launch follows the capability for users to add an eligible driver's license and state ID to Apple Wallet. Digital ID does not replace a physical passport. It cannot be used for international travel and border crossings. I'm Stephanie Cox, and this is World Watch. It's been 10 years since a horrific attack in Paris killed 130 people. The deadly attack on November 13, 2015, unfolded at a concert hall where the American group Eagles of Death Metal was playing. The 1,500-seat hall was sold out. 89 people were massacred by Islamic State terrorists who fired assault rifles into the crowd. Nearly 100 others were taken to the hospital in critical condition. Other attacks happened on cafe terraces where innocent diners were gunned down. Then President Francois Hollande declared a nationwide state of emergency. Around 10,000 soldiers were deployed to sensitive areas, including train stations and places of worship. Mayor Anne Hidalgo says Paris has rebuilt its culture of joy, celebration, of diversity, of sharing, of music, despite the desire of the terrorists to destroy it.
It really changed our lives because it's true that I belong to those generations that never experienced war, never saw scenes of such violence with death, people killed by bullets, weapons of war. So yes, it was like plunging into a world that wasn't our own, and undoubtedly for Paris too, losing some of its lightheartedness, because the terrorists wanted to attack this culture of ours.
France began a day of commemorations at the Stade de France today for the attacks. French President Emmanuel Macron laid a wreath at the memorial for bus driver Manuel Diaz. He was killed in suicide bomb blasts outside the stadium in Saint-Denis, a suburb of Paris, that marked the beginning of the attacks. Macron, survivors, and relatives of victims will pay tribute to those killed and wounded at each of the sites of the attacks throughout the day. In South Korea, 2 people were killed and 18 others injured after a truck collided with pedestrians at an outdoor market. Police are questioning the truck driver. He's in his 60s, and police say he was not under the influence of alcohol or drugs. The accident happened in Bucheon, near the capital city of Seoul. Witnesses told investigators the vehicle reversed about 90 feet before driving forward about 500 feet, colliding with pedestrians on the way. The driver said his vehicle malfunctioned and that officials are reviewing security camera footage. The European Union is working on different ways to fund Ukraine's defense and its economy. The desired option is still using the profits from Russian assets frozen in the West. Earlier today, the European Commission president explained how this would work.
So this would mean take the cash balances from the immobilized Russian assets, hand them as a loan to Ukraine, and Ukraine has to pay back this loan if Russia pays back reparations.
She added that there are 2 other options to fund Ukraine's financing needs. One would be for the EU to use headroom in its budget to raise capital, and the third option would be an agreement among member states to raise capital by themselves. But the Commission president says using profits from frozen Russian assets would be the best option. She calls it the most effective way to sustain Ukraine's defense and its economy. She also says it's a good way to make Russia understand that time is not on its side. But Belgium, where most of Russia's funds are actually being held, is still against the idea. The country says using Russia's funds could pose a risk to Belgium. Some EU officials are calling on the Commission to listen to and respect Belgium's concerns. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio refuted media reports claiming that the UK stopped sharing intelligence on drug trafficking vessels because of concerns over U.S. airstrikes in the Caribbean region. Rubio said that no recent changes have undermined federal operations. Here's more.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Wednesday rejected complaints from some allies over the legality of U.S. strikes in the Caribbean. Rubio was at a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Canada, where talks focused on the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. But some of the country's president have raised concerns about U.S. attacks on vessels, which the Trump administration says are carrying drugs. France's foreign minister said Tuesday the strikes, quote, violate international law and are a worry for nearby French territories. The U.S. military has hit at least 19 suspected drug boats in the Caribbean and off Latin America's Pacific coast, killing at least 76 people. However, before leaving Canada, Rubio told reporters no one mentioned the strikes to him at the meeting. He defended targeting what he called narco-terrorists, saying drugs moved from Venezuela to Europe, and the U.S. should be thanked. He added that Europe doesn't get to decide how Washington defends its national security. Rubio also dismissed a CNN report that Britain stopped sharing drug intel over the strikes.
We have very strong partnerships with the UK and other countries. Again, nothing has changed or happened that has impeded in any way our ability to do what we're doing, nor are we asking anyone to help us with what we're doing in any realm, and that includes military.
The Trump administration says the targeted boats carried drugs. Washington claims the strikes comply with UN Charter Article 51 on self-defense. The G7 statement backed fighting drug trafficking at sea, but did not mention the U.S. campaign.
More on Rubio. The Secretary of State has addressed West Bank violence, saying the incidents could undermine Gaza peace talks. Israeli settlers allegedly torched and defaced a mosque in a Palestinian village in the West Central Bank Tuesday night.
But yes, look, certainly there's some concern about events in the West Bank spilling over and creating an effect that could undermine what we're doing in Gaza. We don't expect it to. We'll do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen.
The incident comes a day after some Israeli leaders condemned a recent attack by settlers against Palestinians. One wall and at least 3 copies of the Quran were torched. On one side of the mosque, messages were written such as, "We are not afraid, we will revenge again, and keep on condemning." The Hebrew scrawl was difficult to make out. It appeared to reference Major General Avi Bluth, the chief of the Israeli military's Central Command. Bluth denounced the violence yesterday. It was the latest in a string of attacks that have provoked expressions of concern from top officials, military leaders, and the Trump administration. As the trade truce between China and America takes shape, the U.S. is eyeing ways to combat China's dominance over rare earth and critical minerals. It's an issue that some describe as our single greatest vulnerability. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
The bipartisan House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is exposing an issue that's cost Americans jobs, businesses, and jeopardized our national security. Investigators released a new report this week. A key point is that China rose to dominance in the critical mineral arena not through fair competition, but through predatory practices. The CCP's goal is to deal a blow to Western economies. In the words of China Committee Chairman John Molinar, China has a loaded gun that is pointed at our economy, and we must act quickly. America relies on China for over 80% of its rare earths, which are needed to make products we use every day, from electronics to medical equipment to military and defense gear, you name it. This is a dependence by design that's been in the making for more than 3 decades.
The PRC developed this control over decades of careful planning and execution. In 1992, then Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping famously said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths."
China has long subsidized its own production and lured Western companies into collaboration only to then cheat by selling products below market value. This put Western companies out of business. Though the impacts of this have become more evident during the U.S.-China trade war, officials have long known that this problem exists, some even describing it as our single greatest vulnerability.
We have known that China is able and willing to weaponize its chokehold on critical minerals against adversaries like the United States. Despite knowing these dangers, the U.S. is no closer to achieving critical mineral independence than we were 15 years ago.
To combat this, the Trump administration is preparing to appoint a critical minerals czar. The committee is also suggesting to create a strategic resource reserve that would be similar to the national oil reserves. Lawmakers are also eyeing critical minerals tax credits to try to boost more domestic production. Though a big piece of the equation here is how to expedite mining permits. This is usually an uphill battle because of pushback from environmental groups. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Thank you, Melina. The Select Committee on the CCP will hold a hearing next week on this very topic to further expose the CCP's predatory practices and their impact on Americans. And a Chinese researcher in Michigan has pleaded guilty to smuggling a dangerous crop fungus from China and lying about it to U.S. officials. 33-year-old Jian Yunqing admitted to bringing in a pathogen that devastates wheat and barley crops from China last year. The fungus caused billions of dollars in damage to American farmers between 1998 and 2000. Jian was sentenced to time served and will be deported after spending 5 months in custody. Prosecutors say she was part of a wider network of Chinese researchers smuggling biological materials through the University of Michigan. In a letter to the court, Jian apologized, saying she wanted to find ways to protect crops from the disease and was under pressure to produce results. And for several years, relations between Europe and China have cooled. Yet some countries have deepened ties with Beijing, facing growing risks of dependence, especially through China's Belt and Road Initiative. Lawmakers from across the bloc gathered in Brussels to discuss the challenges arising from partnerships with the Chinese Communist Party. NTD international correspondent David Vivez reports.
While the EU as a whole is moving toward gradual de-risking from Beijing, several countries such as Spain and Hungary have recently reinforced ties with China through Belt and Road projects, underlining the bloc's difficulty in uniting. With the Eurozone experiencing slow economic growth and facing serious issues regarding energy sources and rare earth minerals supply, some member states are looking for alternative solutions. At the Interparliamentary Alliance on China last week in Brussels, legislators from across Europe highlighted some countries' dependence on China. Patterns of Chinese Communist Party influence, often at the expense of national interests, emerged as members of IPAC discussed the challenges their countries face in relations with Beijing. Scottish politician Stuart MacDonald said there is a lack of awareness in Scotland about the long-term risks of deals made with China.
We have an issue in the energy sector, particularly the renewable energy sector, very heavy over-reliance on China there. We have an over-reliance on China in our higher education sector, particularly our universities, which have become so dependent on the funds that come from the large volumes of students from China.
He said one example is how China's state-owned PetroChina has a stake in Scotland's critical energy sector. While PetroChina decided to close its oil refinery in the country, experts know that Scotland no longer controls how its energy is produced or regulated. Due to several factors, Scotland now has some of the highest energy costs in Europe.
We've just closed our last remaining oil refinery, 50% owned by PetroChina. Scotland is unique in that it is an oil-producing country with no oil refinery. This is madness, and the result of that has been quite an enormous hit to our economy nationally, very big hit to that economy locally with the loss of hundreds of jobs. But we had in Grangemouth, which is the name of the oil refinery that closed down, a huge stake from PetroChina. That should never have been allowed to happen.
Smaller countries also voiced concerns that the Chinese Communist Party takes advantage of large loans accepted by their governments. Members of parliament from Balkan countries such as Bosnia-Herzegovina and North Macedonia said they are facing similar challenges with Chinese investments.
They have been financing the building of a new coal factory in Tuzla region in the north of Bosnia-Herzegovina, 613 million euros. Also providing laws for different infrastructural projects, strategic energy, road, transportation infrastructure. So we see their growing influence and are not really aware of what it will cost us in the future.
Gratz says beyond economic issues, there might be threats to democracy as well, as the Chinese Communist Party does not respect democratic processes and could impose political narratives and agendas to the country's legislature.
I think what they are trying to show is that a non-democratic model would also work under the circumstances that the Western Balkans are currently in between, getting more integrated into the Western world, as we call it, and the Western standards. So I think they're trying to show, well, this might work for you, but I don't think it really, it would ever work.
The proposed solution is to diversify supply sources, reduce global dependence on China, and strengthen unity among EU countries using legislative tools. David Vives, NTD News, Brussels.
Forced organ harvesting. The shocking practice of killing people to steal their organs is once again in focus. Lawmakers from 28 countries are joining forces to push for tougher laws against the crime. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China said yesterday that its members condemn the abhorrent practice of state-sanctioned organ harvesting and trafficking. The group says it will push for bans on transplant tourism, sanctions on perpetrators, and greater transparency in transplant systems worldwide. Forced organ harvesting in China is mostly committed against prisoners of conscience. Its scale ballooned after the turn of the century, correlating closely with the Chinese regime's persecution of Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. The spiritual discipline is based on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. The practice was first introduced to China in 1992 and quickly grew to an estimated 70 to 100 million followers by 1999. That same year, the Chinese Communist Party launched a nationwide campaign to eradicate the group. Now to Australia, where a world-first ban on kids using social media starts on December 10th. Australian teens will soon face a choice before account deactivation begins. Here's a closer look.
Australian teenagers are set to lose their social media accounts, with a ban on young users set to kick in from December 10th. Over the coming days, online platforms like TikTok, Snapchat, Meta, and Instagram will notify more than 1 million teen account holders in the country. Users under the age of 16 must choose an option: download data, freeze their profiles, or lose everything under the world-first ban on kids using social media. Based on information from insiders, the big platforms plan to deactivate accounts for users under the age of 16. Australia's other 20 million social media users should face no big changes. The move puts the nation out front in shielding young people from online risks. Earlier this year, platforms had warned of total chaos, fearing that they could lose users and face $32 million fines for breaking the rules. They said required age checks would mean constant logins, invade privacy, and often be wrong or easy to dodge. But now, firms will use existing software that guesses ages from user habits. Instead of asking for birth dates all the time, they will generally only push people to special age check apps if someone complains about being blocked by mistake. The setup might hit snags at first. Age check apps, which are being deployed at scale for the first time, can make mistakes. La Trobe University AI professor Deswin Da Silva explains.
One of the challenges with age verification also was this band between 15, 16, 17. How do you distinguish 15 from 16 and 17? So a lot of the technological methods of age verification will fail in that narrow band. And there might be false positives where certain individuals who are over 16, slightly over 16, will be banned from these platforms because their content was classified as relevant to an under 16 sort of target demographic. It's probably going to be service distortion, service failure for a couple of days or weeks maybe, until the platforms figure this out. And we'll see a lot of articles on media and maybe even on social media itself of false positives.
Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, and Google declined to comment. The law states that such platforms must take, quote, reasonable steps to block minors. If the rollout goes smoothly, it could guide the world in cutting kids' exposure to harms like bullying or weight issues from screens.
And elsewhere, the UK and France added age gates for adult content earlier this year. In November, Denmark said it would ban under 15s from social media.